Hello, everyone. Welcome. There's an old and natural association between seers, whatever we may mean by this, and wisdom, whatever we may mean by this. And in a sense, a seer is anyone who sees what is very difficult or uncommon to see, but also who sees, perhaps spiritually, what does this even mean? Right? It means perhaps outside of time, outside of tradition, outside of common supposition, outside of expectation, beyond meta. And those who see know a simple secret that is often overlooked. And it is that beginnings are sacred and should be treated with reverence. And so the first movement, the first gesture, the first offering in any relationship or communication should be made with deep awareness of its capacity to fertilize all future branchings of the relationships and situations that are founded, initiated, in a first gesture, as if time, space, and relation are virginal. And any first movement tears the envelope of time, history, and relation. And this is different for males and females. The females have the hymen, which comes, I think, from the Greek word haima, meaning blood. But the virginity of males is mysterious. It's not merely physical. And that which breaks the haima does not necessarily directly fertilize the matrix or the womb, but it affects its present historical and future metaphysical structure, in a sense. It's what we might think of as the web of its energetic aspect, which we might think of as primordial to its physicality, right? Not an afterthought. The energetic aspect is not an afterthought. It's primordial. It comes before, exists during, and persists after. physical transformations, physical emergence, and so forth. And so in the beginning, this old bird, it's very beautiful. He's an old man. He knows. But he is also he's very nervous, this old blue jay who's following me, who I'm feeding from my hand. People who are wise and who can see will revere the encompassing circumstances and the initial movements, actions, choices, speech. Not merely of a relationship, right? Not merely those that begin relationships, which are profoundly important. But also those that begin communications. So the first time one communicates with another person, or a place, or an animal, or a situation, a lineage, a history, perhaps even a linguistic. This is why we have in the beginning of a written communication the feature that we refer to as the salutation. Right? And often in the salutation, and this is so strange because in our modern situation, we're missing 90% of the crucial content. And by content, I mean understanding, awareness, memory, and amnesis. The real knowledge, not the structured remains of what was once alive. Not the skeletal remains of insight, liberation, beauty, magic, musea, potency. Not that. So in our written communications, they may begin with a cruelly abbreviated homage. Dear, person of the first name. And of course, there are various honoraria that are employed to respect the status of persons whose social or logistical or political, socio-political status, or academic status, or medical status has been raised above that of what we might think of as the common citizen, or even a slave. And we should remember that slaves weren't allowed to have, in some places anyway, slaves weren't allowed to have filial names, I think, if I recall correctly. But my point here isn't really this. What I want to highlight is that when we begin to address someone, we are addressing the entire lineage from which that person arises, or for which that person is the embodied expression and temporally local to us embodiment of. And so, unlike our modern habits, we should have presence of awareness of just how profound this is, and not merely in our first interaction, which connects our lineage and theirs. The entirety of our history, all of my grandmothers and grandfathers, all of the living places that were like wombs to us, all of the creatures who gave us food, shelter, comfort, all of the beings who sacrificed their lives to keep us alive while we drew breath, all of the insects, all of the plants that we related with, that our lineage was relating with, and was the living, emergent hand of all of these matters, which literally means all of these mothers. All of these matters should remain in our heart and the spirit of our action as holy, not in the sense of belonging to some religious tradition, in the sense of becoming the living elixir of an amnoesis, unforgetting. You know, in listening recently to Amon Hillman, who at times rages like a prophet, and at other times speaks moderately like a scholar. And it's wonderful to see the that range, that spectrum, that curve, right, in his thought, concern, expression. He has an awareness of such matters, it seems. And also, perhaps, of the strange results of intentionally violating them. And I don't mean to speak for him. He's quite capable of speaking for himself. But what I will speak of is the peculiar cross-fertilization that I experience and am here expressing, that arises as a result of the exposure to the strange elixir of his thought, his reverence for the ancient Greek, and even the purple. His expositions, his orations, act on me. I don't have to concern myself much with what we might describe as his veracity. Yeah. Dan McClellan is excellent at attempting this. Whether or not he succeeds is another story. But as a master of the demonstration of public knowledge and public debate, McClellan is extremely skillful, difficult to doubt at best. But McClellan's overlooking something fundamental, which is the spirit in which endeavors are composed, in which they are conceived. And so before I continue today, I want to pay homage to your ancestors, the lineages you are the living organ of. Your mothers, my mothers, our fathers, the beings who supported and nurtured and sheltered and fed and sustained us, all of them, the living places, the insects, the plants, the microorganisms, the sky, the gods, the angels, the daimons, all those beings who the humans have nomenclature to refer to, and those they do not. And in our time, that's probably most of them. Because our lexicons are impoverished compared to the grandeur they might once have known, embodied. And these first gestures, comprise one of the pivots that is very important, not merely in relation, but in speaking. And particularly if relations become intimate, right? To intelligently resist the possibility of violation, we must negotiate consent. And there's a catastrophic difference between formal negotiations of consent, which are often crucial, especially if what are involved are groups of humans or beings, and the informal but nonetheless successful by successful I mean successful in determining the existence of and expressions of consent in a relationship. Now, consider two human beings approaching each other, walking on the street. Now, this is a completely bizarre and, in a sense, very confused and almost wrong, in the sense of it shouldn't really exist this way. But you have two strangers approaching each other on the street. There's a variety of perfunctory glances toward each other or peripherally encompassing the other. There's a complex negotiation that leads either to, it leads to a broad array of forms of observation. And purposes for observation or non-observation, purposes for relation or non-relation. The female of the J pair has come with her mouth full of moths to greet me, as if to signal approval and perhaps consent. She observes from afar that her mouth is full of moths is symbolically profound. She's gathering the moths in her mouth as they hatch and or as they mate. And now the male is near me. He looks at me, turning back and forth with his two eyes. His left eye sees broadly, his right eye sees specifically. If he looks at me, it is with his right eye. If he sees for me, it is with his left eye. He sees around me with his left eye. Above us, a raven, but there are hawks that live here, predators. And if you think that the blue jays are different from us, you're right, but not in all of the senses that you may think. There are beings above us, winged beings, that travel quickly in time and relation. And some of them are predatory, and few of them are helpful, but some of them can be. In the same way, these jays have forged a relationship with me, a slow-moving land creature compared to them, one who lives long compared to them, one who is, in some senses, above their way of life, beyond their way of life. I connect them with my people, and they connect me with their people. And who knows, perhaps at death, our positions may invert, and they will be above me, and I will be delicate and short-lived. I've heard such stories of jay-headed sentinels and escorts near the river Lethe. So when we come together, we humans, we have this perfunctory and confusing relationship with consent, particularly sexually between men and women. I heard a wonderful vignette between Eric Weinstein and Anna Kakian. I'm probably mispronouncing her name. Kvakian? I can't quite recall. One of the hosts of Red Scare, the Red Scare podcast. And they have a beautiful little colloquy surrounding this topic of consent in the age of political correctness, even if they are both largely what we might refer to, perhaps mistakenly, as cisgendered. And thus, why do I say perhaps mistakenly? Because the most common use of this particular nomenclature is to divest people of the right to speak at all on matters related to gender identity and or the relationship between the genders. Most often, this is a term of denigration and almost an insult. Not always, commonly. I just saw a creature that I don't know what it was. It was fast and small, but too large to be an ordinary insect. I wonder if I have managed somehow accidentally to comprise a context in which actual magic may begin to emerge in the ordinary, in the otherwise ordinary, spacious, living time of this garden. This is a possible thing. And it needn't involve strange rites. It needn't involve explicit erotic behavior. It needn't involve violence or violation. It needn't involve taboo. Often, the fundamental ingredient of transcendental, non-ordinary experience is memory, acknowledgement, honoring, inclusion. Not in the DEI sense. Though I'm going to stop taking pokes at wokist ideology. I'll stop there. Inclusion in the anamnoetic sense of recognition, of antecedents and progeny. Acknowledgement, honoring, making offerings of reverence and humility. To the entire spectrum, the broad arcs of the ancients. Think how uncommon this is in our time. Any person or group doing this would light up like a star, like a constellation of stars, on the surface of the earth and in the temporal manifold. The moment, as it is participated and observed by many beings, most of whom have no place in the lexicons of the speakers of English. Some of whom have a place in the lexicons of the speakers of Hebrew. Some of whom have a place in the lexicons of the speakers of ancient Greek. And other languages. Hindi, Japanese, Chinese, Russian. Each of the languages is like a spoke on a wheel of identity containing lost features, features that went missing from the others, some of the others, and sometimes having unique elements that were never present in them. True reverence, anamnoetic reverence, is powerful, perhaps more powerful than incantations, spells. And certainly inclines other beings to recognize our own posture, role, the meaningful aspects of the feathers of our identity, which are the wings of our spirit. one of the things I hear when I hear Amun speak is the dulcet tones of an impassioned orator. He's capable of some of the old amazing stuff, right? He's capable of being possessed. And one of the important features, well, I don't want to leave my topic just yet. The topic, okay, so let me return. I'm getting, as they say, ahead of myself, which almost means, oops, I've formed a second mind that is interfering with the one that I'm currently using to navigate at the moment, or to express, or to see, or to speak, or to hope, to pursue. Because the topic of oration is very profound. Oratio seems to mean, I'm probably mispronouncing this, but in the mutual exploration I was listening to earlier between Gnostic informant Amun and Ariel, Amun said oratio, or and again, I may be mishearing or pronouncing this. It means unseen. But it sort of implies, if I've got the resemblance right here, it implies unspoken, non-verbal. Oratia, right? Oration, non-speaking. Or an oration. Be that as it may, I may have that wrong. Sometimes mondegryns are more revelatory of the mind of the listener and its subterranean, the structure in the psyche of the mind of the listener. The coral reefs of consciousness underneath the ocean. But I was speaking of beginnings and the importance of understanding the nuanced possibilities of intelligent signaling. And particularly the understanding that first gestures are crucially pervasive over future transformations and emergences. They determine the forms. They have a powerful determinative influence on what comes after them. Yeah. So it's sort of the opposite of prophecy. Instead of you retract yourself from inaction in a timeline that you're carefully observing, it's almost like the abstraction of temporality. You invoke, you fertilize this moment together, and fertilize this moment according to your mutually, not merely exciting, but impassioned or honored or fervently hoped for, and as if the entire audience of the history of the participants, right, the entire lineage audience is participating, recognized, invoked, adored, remembered, brought back to, resurrected in you and those to whom, or the one to whom you, with whom you are in communion. You enter into communion together. And, of course there's a vulgar, our modernity is so vulgar in this sense. And there are those who celebrate this vulgarity in the sense that it violates the kind of dead, concrete structure of tradition, expectation, organized religion, and so forth. Okay, I get it. Shoot them with a bullet is not what I mean. But this is what I mean by the vulgarity, and it's explicitly it's explicit violation of expectation and tradition, and perhaps falsely sacred lines of culture, thought and exposition, action, rule-making, punishment, inquisition. Surely the idea of inquisition is practiced by some Christians and perhaps others is a horrifying caricature of the possibility of questing, to seek with noble heart and a self-unclothing, right? A star of intention that dissolves its armor as it proceeds within us, as our hearts, as our spirits, as our incarnate bodies. So much of our modernity is very vulgar, so unlike the dragonfly that has lit upon this branch before me, whose eyes are worlds, whose ancestors are myriad, who is in fact a doorway, a forest of portals, alive and beckoning to those who understand and remember, to those who recognize, to those who can sing the paeans. And to sing such paeans, I must be dispossessed of my personal identity. And this is the possibility of real humility, from which an authentic salutation may emerge. Sometimes in the Tibetan Buddhist scriptures we hear something, and it would be wonderful to hear it in the original language, but we hear something like that is translated in English into the phrase, "O noble one." And almost always when we hear this phrase, it is a call to transcendental anamnesis. O noble one. And as I say this, I was gazing into the eyes of the dragonfly, a couple of inches from my face. Though my vision gets old now, it's blurry. I used to be able to see with pristine clarity at every distance, but now, close up, things blur. To see clearly, I must retreat from them. And we think of this as a physical problem, a mechanical problem, and it is, and yet the metaphor of it is also quite profound, I think. Yeah. You know, the vocalizations of the birds are living anamnoesis. They are not expressing abstract things. They are not words. I don't believe they are representational, though I believe it's conceivable that the birds have similar assets. I just don't think they express them vocally. Well, I could well be wrong about this. There's much to learn about the language of the birds and their musics. A living mystery, alive to our perception, largely invisible to our cognition, resembling in this sense our own dreams. You know, I'm willing now to depart the arcs of the first topic, but hold them in your thought and concern, if you will, as I proceed. Because by elucidating them, it is my way of paying homage to the ancestral beings, the progenitors of our being, in the sky and on the earth and beyond the sky, and our own progeny, our future children. Many of whom, you know, we imagine as humans that your children are the children you give birth to. No. We parent one another. When we adore one another, we become, it's funny, I don't want to use the legal language, but in loco parentis. We adopt each other in life through relation and care and concern and love. We adopt one another, and so too we adopt each other's families and are adopted by them to varying degrees, depending on our capacities for relational intimacy, deeper than the specific human with whom we may be engaged in the moment, right? The meta. I met a morph, his eyes shining. A poeticism from an old friend whose intelligence was so profound, and I'm sure still is. There are many opposites of consent. There's the obvious sort of direct violation of consent that we understand to be rape, whether it's physical, emotional, relational, financial, circumstantial, situational, an egregious violation of any kind comprises a form of rape. And one of the members of the Extinctionati with whom I was in conversation the other day was expositing on the rape imposed on us through the concept of equality of commodities, and how Aristotle, I believed, I'm depending on my rather frail memory here, in his Nicomachean Ethics, and I'm probably mispronouncing that because I think I've only heard it pronounced once or twice, spoke of how this imposition of equality among things that cannot be equal is the origin of every problem, even more significant than the problem of money, which is certainly catastrophically primordial in the history and emergence of wrongdoing among humans, injustice, agony, rape. Just as that horrifying noise violates my sanity in body and mind, the unjustifiable derivation of our being and lives into dollars and cents and numbers in banks. You know, what won't the humans do? There is no answer. That list is blank. What won't they do en masse? Once the necessity of money is introduced, which collapses all values to one representation. All histories, all futures, all ancestors, all children, all progenitors. But I'm getting, again, I've departed the path of my intention. So there are so many fascinating implications of some of the concepts that Anand Hillman introduces. And I've allowed myself to become a bit enchanted, not so much with the man, who I know little of, but with his orations and concerns. And in a sense, in conversations with friends of late, I have mimicked his vocal style in the sense that the listener might imagine I am mocking him, but I'm not mocking him. I'm attempting to invoke his mind, right? This goes more toward the topics that I'm going to chase. So we have this idea in the West under Christianity of demonic possession, and what we think this means, usually, is informed by like the film The Exorcist or whatever. It's bad to be possessed by demons because they're evil and they're eternally hungry and they will murder and rape and destroy and cause war and plagues and all of these things, right? They are essentially the the matrix or womb in which evil is conceived and from which it emerges into our human experience in the world. And this is at best confused and at worst completely wrong. And we should be very, very careful when we come under the enchanting sway of a concept that is almost completely wrong, or very close to being completely wrong. It's probably true that there are no things which are explicitly untrue that can be conceived, right? In the sense that conception itself is a mode of truth, right? The conceivable is truly conceived, the speakable is truly spoken in the sense of being. It is there, right? I have spoken these words, they are spoken. It's true that I've spoken them. And it's a similar kind of truth in conception. But there are inconceivable things which are also true. And perhaps there are inconceivable things which are not true. But we should not be too concerned about truth and falsity. Rather, we should be concerned with seeing the nobility of our spirit and relations. And by nobility, I don't mean the wealth. I mean the relational integrity. I mean the virtue. Not the counterfeits of virtue that wear the clothing. No, the essential virtue. And, you know, when we listen to music that is profound, we should be aware of the relationship to the concept of the Muses in Greece. in Greek. The musea, those places where the muses prevail over, above, are instructive to our otherwise mundane humanity. To be possessed by the muses is not perhaps at all demonic, but rather angelic. And to be possessed by angels could be as bad as our imaginings of possession by demons. These two words are very peculiar, and I may pursue their disambiguation a bit later, but for the moment what I will do is say something very strange. Suppose that there are intelligences transcendental to those of humans and progenerative of those of humans, whose eroses result in the possibility of minds, right? Whose eros results, whose relational and enacted eros results in the possibility of minds. And these beings are not, as we imagine, black or white, red or blue, near or far, past or future, but are rather always profusely dimensionalized. And what happens when we relate with them is that our modes and motives and desires collapse that multimodal, multidimensional, transcendental potential toward something that matches up with our gestures in the relationship. And I will argue that all beings and situations are thus. And this is actually the fundamental principle on which relatively conceptually ridiculous cults that orbit the concept of, quote, manifestation, unquote, emerge from. Suppose then that the field being, the multidimensional field being that we may experience as a demon or an angel or a daimon, an intelligent, non-human interlocutor, one with whom we have something resembling intellectual intercourse, or even more like the intercourse of intelligences, right? And the broad array of possible forms of Eros that lie beyond the act of getting our physical flowers involved in rubbing against each other in some way. rubbing up against things. And I'm not casting aspersions on physical Eros. I'm just saying that the library of Eros, of modes and forms and purposes of Eros that are accessible to us is so far beyond our imagining that often it's as if we're trading the wrapping, the envelope in which the wedding invitation arrives for the experience of the wedding and the honeymoon and the children and the whole, the whole actual the whole of the living intimacies, the forest and the oceans of the living intimacies that are not merely our birthright, and our natures, they are our origins, and perhaps in some sense our purposive more horrifying noises brought to you by human technique. They are the purposive, the living purposive matrix from which our incarnations ensue. Now, one of the things that Amon's orations have caused my attention to turn toward, because he seems to be saying things about, he seems to be a proponent of orgiastic frenzy under the influence of complex venoms from snakes, plants, dusts, human bodies. He seems to be a proponent of the application of elixirs formed in the bodies of women primarily, and of orgiastic frenzy and perhaps even death that is then obviated through the careful application of staggeringly sophisticated antidotes. The purple, brah, in his eyes. And he may well be. It's up to him to assert his predilections. But what he has brought to fruition in my awareness, what I have gleaned from exposure to his madness, right, which is itself like one of those elixirs when he's at his best, right? It's intoxicating, it's enchanting. And one of the modulants of consent is enchantment, hypnos, trance. This can modulate consent. Now, ordinarily, an actual hypnotist will usually, under most circumstances, there might be some exceptions where the patient has already agreed to treatment or so forth, but they will elicit consent, right? And one of the simplest ways to do this, that was the first way demonstrated to me, is to just ask someone, would you like to feel better right now? And I'm not offering that here, because if I'm enchanting you, you've already given your consent by listening, right? You've chosen to have my voice in your ears. So the consent is there present. And you also have the capacity to turn away if you find the spirit of my oration or my words or these ideas objectionable, as some will certainly do. I've often lost close companions over their objections to their interpretations of my speech or writing and what they think I'm trying to do, which is almost never what I'm actually trying to do. Well, very rarely. When they depart from me, it's almost never what they've misconstrued me in some way, usually very dramatically. Nonetheless, enchantment is a drug. It's an intoxicant in the sense that it transforms the basis of our waking world awareness. And the great orators and sophists and the Rhapsodes of Greece both were uniquely excellent in their capacity to enchant, not merely with language, but with music. Literally with the I would not call them drugs. I would call them modes. The modes of spirit, the modes of the concentration of spirit, meaning vital flow, water, wind. The modes of instructuring this flow over time that produce non-ordinary experience. We adore the brilliant poet, the brilliant orator, Arundhati Roy, Ursula K. Le Guin, Lynn Margulis, Nora Bateson, Tamsin Woolley Barker on a good day, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Nelson Mandela, perhaps Stephen Biko, before he was assassinated. The prophets, Ibn Arabi, I won't name prophets, many. I'm going to carefully not name a few. Lao Tzu. And those whose names I hear omit, because Socrates himself wrote no books. And other prophets wrote no books. And prophets that wrote books, or about whom books were written, become very dangerous for us, because the existence of those books tends to the humans weaponize their results. And this is as tragic as it is devastating to human awareness and intimacy and potential. Where it is not actively liberating, it becomes devastating. And by the way, that word deva, that word refers to something we know little of. Intelligences from beyond the sky, beyond time. Angels, the devas, the jinn, the daimons, the demons, the devils. And again, imagine that all those words actually refer to one form of potential, that much like the wasp, if related with intelligently and with awareness, nearly will never harm you and may endow you with elixirs of wisdom and insight from their people, from their lineage, from their future. And I have been thus touched by a wasp once in my life, to my shock and tearful ecstasy. But if you threaten them, now you want a demon? They'll show you demons. You will regret drawing breath very quickly. and they will intoxicate you with their venoms, right? So, what I am trying to say is that I have, in my own way, drunk a little bit of the elixir from Amun's cups, and the resulting intoxications have given me wisdom. I can see better, more deeply. And one of the things I see is that in our culture, we celebrate possession, okay? Those rock bands, the pop singers, McDonald's, Jack in the Box, our brilliant orators, who are almost never our politicians for reasons so ironic, right? Because these people should be very skillful, sincere orators, but they are neither. They are counterfeits. Our police and our soldiers should be the liberators of the oppressed, not the predators that act at the behest of the wealthy, the slave owners, the war makers, the warmongers, the corporations, which are, in the worst sense, demons, and possess our lives. We are possessed. They demand that we submit to their possession while we work for them in the daytime, in the nighttime. That is violation. That is rape, even when we consent. Because the consent is not free. We cannot see. It is forced. And it is primarily forced by the bizarre, inhuman, demonic imposition of structured economies that make slaves of us all and insult our ancestors and ruin our children. We celebrate possession. Think of the actors. Surely these human beings want to know the breadth of the scope of the possibility of being possessed by a character they are not. A historical character, a possible character, a future character. You see the temporalization features here? Rumi was possessed by the spirit of Eros and wisdom. The spirits of Eros and wisdom at the same time were collapsing into intercourse inside his heart. Right? And he, a helpless, not helpless, he a brilliant participant in that magical Eros, was so bold as to experience the necessity of making their music in the language he was familiar with. California sage. Oh, it is exquisite. California sagebrush. Magic, alive in my hand. Hi. The actors, the orators, in ancient Greece, Socrates was, Ammon speaks of the sting of the gadfly and how this is related to the concept of Christos. And this is specifically the vector along which Dan McClellan attacks him. Very effectively, in my view. Dan's quite effective. You don't want to have to face that guy. He's got 9 swords where you have, a teaspoon or whatever. Though I'd like to see a face-off, I guess. I'm not a huge fan of combat. And combat was really mostly about verity, right? Veracity. Because it was believed primarily that the non-human intelligences would pervade over the field and make known their insights and preferences in the bodies of the victors. But that's a broadly confused mistake, because often the vanquished are the holy. Right? Victory is not equivalent to holy. This is the rape of the equal sign that my conversational companion was talking about. Right? Victory equals holiness. Nope, not true. Nuance equals wisdom. Sensitivity, awareness equals perception. You got some rules that you think apply to, situations with 1 billion dimensions. You think you can collapse them down to 2 and then make a pick? This is hubris of the most devastating kind. This is the hubris that summons Nemesis to instruct you. We adore possession. We celebrate possession. If the Christians or the Muslims wanted actual purity, I'm wiping the branch of the sagebrush across my eyelids to cleanse my seeing. If they wanted purity, if they wanted fundamentalist devotion, which is almost always insane, because it's not driven by any communication with the divine or any fulfillment of some divine program, protocol, template for virtue. Rather, it is schizogenic. It is the fulfillment of literal interpretations of dead text. And that will never be holy. By the time you have to formalize the rules, there is no more communion. You are lost. There's no hope for you. Because the spirit wind of the communal vitality and virtue, origin and purpose, and progenial future, and amnoetic insight is dead, and what you've got is bones, and you keep making boxes with them. By the time you have to tell humans that slaughtering each other is bad, the rules and laws can no longer help you. Unless you resurrect the spirit of virtue in your mind, heart, and relations, and this must be discovered, not declared. By the time you have to formalize the rules, you have the problem of individuals, self-interest, commodities, representations that stand in the absence of that to which they once may have somehow referred. And where you have representations of virtue, you have something like that. The fuck even is that? It dominates the world and it's not even there. It's not alive. Somebody felt their right of way was violated, so they decided to thunder to the whole planet about it. What even is that? I mean, that's the malignant idea of a demon. But here's the thing. As a musician and a poet and a writer, I long ago began to experience situations in which something took possession of me that wasn't me and was beautiful. Something I trusted, something fundamentally virtuous and intelligent, beyond my capacities for virtue or intelligence. And it made songs, it made poems, it made essays, it made orations. And hopefully today, if I am unimaginably lucky, there's some of that happening here. Something in me, something beyond me that isn't merely me, I have invoked it on purpose. Not because I am proud or skillful, because I am impassioned by the possibility of virtue. The opposite of that noise. That terrible noise of the mock eyes in energy systems. The beings that are not beings. The hammer, the engine, the battleship, the bomb, the missile. Almost all penetrative, with the exceptions of the screens, which are gravitic. This word gravid means filled with eggs. And filled with eggs, we might imagine, means filled with billions of as yet unborn children and their intelligences, filled with the wombs of countless grandmothers of every possible kind, not merely human. Filled with the intelligences of the grandfathers. These sacred substances that Aman speaks of are sacred for reasons that are not vulgar. Intelligence itself involves the reduction of the personal identity to a minimal trace. And this is what is required in dreaming. This is what is required in dreaming. The personal identity is no longer so explicit. And our identity is spread out among all the features of the dreamscape with which we are intimate in the dreaming. We have the false possession of fake politicians and orators, and then we have the real possession of true politicians and orators, which we very rarely see these days. Orators more. And if the fundamentalists were as fundamentalist as they should be, if they're very, very concerned about us being possessed by anything other than the Holy Spirit, quote unquote, whatever. I mean, I believe, don't misunderstand me, I'm not casting aspersions on that noble, virtuous, brilliant light. Not by a long shot. Rather, I'm very concerned about what the humans have made of it. Yeah. But if they're very concerned, they would tell us read no books, because to read a book is to become possessed. And not merely of the mind of the author, but of all of the minds that were progenerative of that author's concerns, speech, skills. The entire historical family that gives birth to this author's book, and the entire family of those who read it and thus become its children. It's fertilizing our minds. We're having intercourse with something above the human, and we think, oh no, that's just Aristotle. That's just the Bible. That's just Dune, right? That's just The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes. That's Julian Jaynes, right? Frank Herbert. That's just Arthur C. Clarke. That's just, the author. That was never even possibly true. There's no chance of that being true. Acts of musea draw us up above our ordinary humanity. And this is what we ache to experience and remember and become together. Because the terrifying prison of our personal identity is a cascade of ever more furious impoverishments that we must escape. And this is why we are addicts. This is why we are missing the nectars of the intelligences above our humanity that we were born to interact with and become together. And without these nectars, we go to their substitutes: nicotine, media, ideology, politics, legality, language. If real fundamentalists, right, if you should only worship Jesus, right, if you should only worship Muhammad, you will read no books. Hello. Hi, sweetie. Because to read books is to become possessed and to be inseminated and invaginated by their authors. And some people say, Darren, you've gone too far. Why do you have to use these words that are indelicate? Because the delicacy is hiding something profound that we need to see together. Eros is the fundamental basis of concern. Without it, are there not things that you can't stand? Are there foods you don't want? Are there forms of speech that you don't like? That cause disgust in your cognition or mind? Are there noises that you don't like? Do you prefer hot or cold? Would you rather be unusually warm or unusually cold? And I don't mean to a lethal degree. Are there flavors that you just don't want that in your mouth? Okay? How do you know how to navigate in consciousness? Is it not by affinity? Because if it's by affinity and disaffinity, then it's by Eros and her antithesis that you travel in consciousness. That you determine whether you agree or disagree with something is a matter of Eros from this useful perspective. It's not the only one. Rationality, we think, is a rule-based system for the determinative dissection of concept situations, processes, and predictions. But there's a factor in there that isn't merely rational. It's anamnoetic, it's memory, it's Eros. And Eros and memory are fundamentally associated in the human soul. And so to the mind, so to the body, so to the behavior. So possession turns out to be 9/10 of the law. In the most unexpected way, right? It didn't mean who's got the object in their pocket. Rather, it means whose minds, who are the minds with whom you are intimate. And whose intelligences are fundamentally trustworthy, familiar, true, anamnoetic, anti-lethal, unforgetting. Now this leaves aside the very complex implications. Well, I'm not going to leave them aside. There's another array of implications in Amon's scholarship surrounding death and resurrection. I mean, imagine an ancient world where resurrection and death were relatively common and were part of initiation rites, right? So that initiates knew that when they began the process of initiation, they were going to die or come extremely close to death, and then at the last moment be resurrected, so that they could see beyond the veil, right? They would have knowledge of the impossible, of the forbidden, and what is most forbidden of all things. The most forbidden thing is knowledge of death. When the little child, what is his name in the Hindu wisdom tale? I cannot right now locate it in memory. The little child goes to visit the avatar of death, and do you ever sell your paintings? May I inquire about that?
Oh, sure. Did you come to me a while back and I was rude to you and said I was in the middle of painting?
I understood why you were rude to me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I understood.
There's no reason.
You were in trance, and I was interrupting you. The flaw is mine, not yours.
That's amazing that you remember. But when,
It's amazing that you remember. We both remember.
no, it's because you've got a very distinctive, very melodious voice.
Oh, thank you for that,
It's
sir.
unusually melodious.
Here is my card.
Oh, thank you.
My name is Darren. What is your name?
My name's Joe.
Joe? A real pleasure to meet you, Joe.
Thanks. Let me just for a quick
Your vision of color is unbelievably profound. It's just magically provocative. I've never seen anything like that, and I'm an aficionado of painting, and I've never seen light like that in your canvases.
I'm enthralled with Monet, because he was the real genius. It's just all on the back.
Is it
like that.
okay? Yeah?
Oh, sure.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I do is I don't have a gallery or anything, so I'm going to bypass the gallery. So what I do is I just meet people like yourself, and they come up to my house, or I go to their house, or whatever. We can meet.
Yeah.
And then it's just an interpersonal thing. We don't have to pay.
That's
any
so
attention
much
to the
more.
gallery.
It's not just the paying of the gallery, it's the humanity of the relationship, right?
Right.
It's authentic,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I will be in touch with you, Joe.
Wow.
I'm so grateful that we met today.
I am too. That's ironic, like the nicest person of the whole day, and I hope I wasn't too rude. It's like I try not to be rude, but once I start talking, because like I know you're so interesting, and a lot of other people are quite interesting. So I forget about that, and I get into the conversation, which is wonderful too. Like, it's an interpersonal thing. It's very.
It is, but I also have this problem that once I start to make face noises, my consciousness collapses into this, right? And that's a different thing from writing or making music or making art, right? If you're writing, you're not talking. You're making music, you're not speaking. Maybe you could speak and cook.
Well, I can do both, but I don't think I do it as well.
Well, I come from Italians, right? And so in the kitchen, it's conversation and cooking, they kind of go together. But yeah, I'm cautious about mixing. I knew why you said no. I was very
I hope
clear
I
in my
wasn't
heart.
too rude, you know, because
No,
it's
you
like
just
the-
said no. That's all you did.
Just
You
like
didn't
that.
even say anything.
That's the-
Actually, you didn't say anything. You just said, that's all. That's all you did.
That's offensive, but yeah,
No.
I'm glad you.
No, I understood. It's a little painful, right? Because I'm like, oh, I felt that I had intruded. That's why it was painful. It wasn't rude.
Nicest person of the whole day.
No.
Of the whole day. Yeah.
No, it's very nice to compliment me that way. But yeah, I appreciate your skillfulness, the light, the way you play with the light.
Exactly.
I've known one or two other painters who can make light on the make light come out of the canvas, you know, illuminate it. Yeah, it's a spiritual thing.
Just don't close you up.
It's all good.
Oh, but see, this is good. See, the thing also is like writing is special and so
It
on.
is.
Like that. But with the painting, you get 2 hours at the most.
Right, you
Really,
only...
honestly, one
Yeah.
and a half, but 2 hours.
Yeah.
So you know the light is going, and then I always cheat a little bit. You know, you cheat and you got to do it. But anyway, you know, it's. I just learned how to do this. I'm so non-technical. This, well, I don't have a website or anything, but yes, that's from today.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. It's like an enchantment. You're making an enchantment. It's like a magic
it's
thing.
the canvas.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not-
but it's
not-
you.
It's, no, it's not. It's when it's true. You know, it's said, but it's really true. When a paintbrush touches a canvas, magic happens.
Yes.
It really does.
But it takes all three and maybe something else. It takes the canvas and the place and the light and you and the sky.
The big spirit.
Yeah, the big spirit. We agree.
Spirit.
I think this is what I'm making a
Yeah.
recording about.
Right.
So some of my listeners will hear your voice. I hope you
Great.
don't mind.
Oh, that's okay, Darren.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. It's
Okay.
consent matters.
Oh, see.
Yeah. Such a
Good.
pleasure to meet you and to
Thanks,
touch your
Darren.
human hand.
Yeah,
My
thanks.
goodness.
Thanks for remembering. That's
Of
great.
course, I recognized you.
Wow.
I'm
That's
so-
what I love about San Francisco. It's
Me
such a-
too.
It's a small, intimate
It's the
area.
possibility, yeah. Culture, depth.
The
Yeah.
possibility. All right.
All blessings.
Thanks, man.
Peace. That was a lucky moment. That man's paintings are astonishing. I've never seen anything like it. They're just filled with this amazing living color. And I approached him the other day and I said, "May I speak with you for a moment?" And he just shook his head. And it was a rebuke, but I understood what was going on. All right, so back to this topic, right? Amon. Never before have I heard anyone say, and look, the scope of my exposure is minimal, but never have I heard anyone imply that as part of initiatory traditions, we might be subjected to death. And of course we have the concept, which is probably misapprehended from the French, of orgasm as the little death and the association between orgasm and death. As if orgasm is some kind of ecstatic suspension of the rhythm and pulses that bind us to existence. As if orgasm happens outside of time. And this is the association with the non-human intelligences, the daimons, the devas, the jinn, the angels. You know, I think demons and devils are vulgar derivations of such ideas. But you know, what Amon seems to be implying, and I intend to inquire of him about this, is that there were initiatory rites and rituals and poisons involving particularly the mixtures of venoms of various snakes and possibly other reptiles, mixtures of bodily secretions, mixtures of plant substances, very, very complex pharmacopoeia. I don't know the Greek words. I'll probably getting them wrong, but I'm trying, making the effort. The essay, and he implies that, at least indirectly, if not directly, that the seers, many of the seers and the prophets and the wise men had undergone these initiatory rituals in which they were either killed or brought to the brink of death and revived. And try to imagine living in a world where death and resurrection is common, right? And so those who can resurrect you are messianic, and then we end up getting, representational derivatives of this in the apocalypse and so forth. And the idea gets weaponized so that now only the elect are resurrection is accessible only to the elect or the sanctified or the anointed, and that you have to go to this person and be anointed by this Messiah, or eternal suffering and damnation, or just destruction, right? Obliteration. And so, you can imagine that, I once opined that, I have a series of essays on my blogger site, which is called Dream Knots, Knots. And these are essays written when I was under the influence of contact with a non-human intelligence in 2009, 10, and beyond. And they are essays about conception and embryology. They are cygenic, right? There's a difference between orations and texts that are cygenic and those that make the claim of fact. And the amazing thing about Ammon is that his way of speaking and the topics that fascinate him and his expression of them are fundamentally cygenic, at least for me. Your mileage may vary. And so it's not like I'm trying to say, oh, Ammon, he's got it right. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. Ammon's dance in the music of language is astonishing and beautiful and profound and enchanting in a way that, if received in the proper spirit, will produce insight, right? It will generate that perspective up above where we normally, up above our normal habituations. In cities that are not flat, primarily the wealthy live up high. And that's not an accident. The gods and the angels and the daimons and the devas and the jinn, they are the habituates of the high places, which are closer to origin, right? If the sky is the nearest representation of origin, then to be closer to the sky is to be proximal to the originary intelligences, the progenerative intelligences from which our minds and bodies and ways of life and incarnations emerge, right? The matrix, the womb. And the sky itself it is as if it's a secondary womb. There's a primary there's a primary situation, more than merely living situation, that the sky is an expression of, in the same way that in very still water in daylight, you look down into the water and what you will see is what's above you. Right? You look down to see above. This is very profound, the light on the water. Sacred. So one can imagine that perhaps, and this is just, I'm asking you to see as if what I'm saying is interesting or useful rather than to say that it is true. But we are born from the lips beneath a triangle that points at the earth. It's literally as if, there's a terrifying noise. It's as if the mother's pubic hair is a cone and the top of it is open, and the point, we emerge from this point. When we have completed the embryogenesis, the process of conception and embryogenesis, we emerge from this point into terrestrial existence. And so if the Egyptians were trying to have, and I don't believe that the pyramids are merely tombs, not by a long shot, but if they wanted their rulers to be resurrected in the world of origin, they would invert that triangle and give it more dimensionality, make it 4-dimensional actually, right? Because time, right? So make it last in time and make it 3-dimensional rather than 2, because as you go up to the sky, the dimensionality increases. And so in death, the pyramid focuses the ruler's essence. And what is this ruler thing? It means measure. It means measure correctly. And to measure correctly is to have true Eros. Your Eros is true. It's divine, it originates divinely, and it cannot be occluded, and it cannot be adulterated. You have true Eros. This is what the rulers have. Those things they hold in their hands, the rod and the crook. That rod is for threshing wheat. Those pharaohs, they held the crook. There's actually another word for the rod that's escaping me at the moment. The child who approaches death in the Hindu myth, I got distracted because I met Joe. The child, what did I do with his card? The child approaches death and he is met by death's retainers. And in this sense, death is an avatar in this crucially important Hindu story. And what is the child's name? Come on, hippocampus, connect me to the memory. And death has another name as well. The child's father has been performing the fire ritual, but insincerely. So you're supposed to give away everything that's important to the monks, and his father's giving the sick cows and the stuff he doesn't really want to keep anyway. He's sort of performing it half-heartedly. And the child says to his father, the child's very precocious, and he says, "Oh, Father, I see what you are doing as you are giving the things you don't want away and not the things you do want. To whom will you give me, oh Father?" And the father says, "I will give you to death," in anger. I'm going to have to pause here because there's a terrible machine noise in my path. It's funny, I tried to look it up, which I very rarely do because I prefer to exercise my memory, my relationship with Mnemosyne, mother of the Muses, whom I adore, and know to be a being, not merely a mechanical concept from which our idea of recording things, in the dead shadow of which we have this idea of recording. Mnemosyne, memory is alive, vital, multi-potent, omnipotent, woman of myriad potencies. It's so funny. The Jehovah's Witnesses, the women who are manning the little stand, were talking about someone buying a commodity for $30 that was worth a lot of money. And they both thought that was really profound, which is the explicit opposite of spiritual value. Irony. I don't mean to defame them. I'm just noticing the irony. I think, I love humans, and all of our delicate confusions are amazing. So I went to look up the story about this child. His father's doing the fire ritual, and he says, "Oh, Father, to whom will you give me?" And I'm probably telling the story very poorly. I think my son caught it from Sarva Priyananda and told it to me. And this is a very clumsy version of it. But Nachiketa is the child's name, which came to me when I failed to find it in attempting to look it up. And he goes to the avatar of death, who has another name that I cannot remember. But Nachiketa's name is more important, I think. And the avatar of death is like a position that one acquires through merit, through meritorious incarnations, right? Through being meritorious in a sequence of lives. And along with this position come a broad array of benefits. Yeah? And the one thing that can deprive one of those benefits is to fail to receive a Brahman's child generously. And Nachiketa seems to know something of this, because when he goes to Death's house, he basically, back in the real world, we must imagine he is dead. Okay? And this is the connecting thought here. He is dead, right? His father says, "I will give you to death." Right? But he doesn't mean I will kill you. He means I will give you to the avatar of death, or whatever, I think. And so Nachiketa says, "Okay, I'm going to go. I will give myself to death," and dies, and then goes and visits Death. And Death is out on an errand or hunting or something, and his retainers invite the child in and say, "Come, let us nourish you and comfort you." And Nachiketa says, "No." It's very stubborn and intelligent, precocious child. Says, "No, I will wait until Death himself arrives." And so he waits, and I guess it's 3 days or something. And then Death comes and is very disturbed. Oh no, why are you outside? Did not my retainers succor you? And Nachiketa says, they did their job. They offered me comfort and refreshment, and I declined. And Death says, because this is the one thing that, if not amended, could deprive death of the boons and benefits to which the inaction of his station entitles him, presuming, the genders here, or that gender is even important, which in some cases we should imagine it isn't at all. Beings, right, don't have to have gender. When we say organism, gender is not indicated. When we say animal, gender not indicated. In any case, so Nachiketa is very canny, and Death says, well, what, I'll give you 3 boons, whatsoever you may ask, I will give you. And Nachiketa says, and I'm not sure of the order here, but he says, I want, when I return to life, I am saddened that I have upset my father. I'm saddened that I've upset my father. And I want him to love me just as profoundly, if not more profoundly, than before I upset him. Because essentially Nachiketa knows what he did. Right? He kind of sinned against his father by revealing the imperfection of his ceremonial intention and inaction of the intention, by revealing that his father was duplicitous in his intention. He has shamed his father. So he asks for his father to love him just as he did before this. And he asks for the secrets of the fire ritual, the deep secrets that are hidden, the occult secrets of the fire ritual. And then is the third thing he asks for, where we get to the connecting thought here. The third thing he asks for are the secrets of death. And this is the thing at which death recoils. And death tries to entice Nachiketa with worldly, before Nachiketa even makes his selection, and this is very common when divine beings meet human beings. Often first they will praise the human being. Oh, you are a special one. We deeply appreciate you. You're amazing, and that's why we've come, right? So they will try to, you see what's going on here? This is very profound. They will try to inflate the sense of the personal identity, right? Which is actually the thing you want to, that's the prison that you've already become trapped in. And they try to make that prison look very shiny. And they're like, oh, Darren, you stand out among all the humans, a shining example. We have noticed you. Right? We have deigned to notice you. Here comes the trap and the danger. You are so beautiful, so intelligent. You are truly noble. Right? All these just praises and compliments, which, when authentic, are not. It's not really a problem. The problem is when we become intoxicated by personal identity. Again, we're in the tiniest trap-like portion of our humanity and our nature, our spirit. Yeah. It's not Darren that's interesting. It's when he gets out of the way. What possesses him when he steps aside? What beauties, what ancients, what progenitors, what spirits, what gods, what angels come when he gets off the stage and makes his incarnation a stage for virtuous intelligences and muses, artists, and so forth. So death offers Nachiketa worldly acclaim, which is the common offer. What would you like? What can I give you? You've caught our attention. We will grant you wishes. What do you want? And one of the most intelligent answers I've ever heard to this question came, I think, pretty sure from my friend Sarah, who I am not speaking with at the moment, but I think it came from her. She said something like, could we preserve the question while we get to know each other better? Because I don't even understand what's going on here. Right? Like, I don't know what or who or how you are. And I'm not sure what or who or how I am in relation with you. So why don't we preserve that question? Would that be okay? That's a really interesting answer that I like a lot. In any case, death offers, you can have fame, you can have power, you can have women, castles, you can have insight, intelligence, courtly adoration, long life, health, the ability to heal people. You can be psychic. And Nachiketa is like, nah, all those things fade away. Those are impermanent. I want my Father's love. I want the secrets of the fire ritual. And I want the secrets of death. And death, right, recoils again, especially at the third one, and says, no, I don't think you understand. And Nachiketa says, oh, I understand. I'm serious. These are the three things I want. And death is like, yes, but even the gods are not granted the secrets of death. This is the key. Right here. Right? This is the forbidden knowledge. The secrets of death. That's the forbidden of the forbidden. That's the most forbidden thing. Anything, one of my friends, Nathan, was asking me the other day, I just don't understand what you mean by forbidden. And I said, it is as if you are in a cage and anything that reveals how the cage was composed, that reveals the bars of the cage to your awareness, that reveals the history of the cage, or that gives you intelligence about the prison in which you find yourself ensconced in your incarnate humanity. Those are the orbits of the forbidden knowledge. Right? And death is the sudden and perhaps nearly complete evacuation of the cages. Right? Suddenly you are outside them. You can see from outside. All of that knowledge, seeing outside the traps of our incarnate waking consciousness, anything that leads us out of that is forbidden. But the thing that fundamentally leads us out of that is death. And this is why you have this is why you have initiation. The knowledge is protected because it's forbidden. And this is why when you go, for example, to meetings of IANS, right? The International Association of Near-Death Studies, and you hear the stories of people who died or very nearly died. Everyone will say, not everyone, some skeptics will say, for example, this bird, does he know me? No. Some skeptics will say, no one has died. If you die, you don't come back. Well, they're wrong about that. Part of what they're saying is, if you don't carefully set where the cut in your consciousness is, what you mean by death, if you don't carefully set that to mean that from which you don't come back, then that's not really death. But There's lots of people whose, brains, they were brain dead, they were heart dead, they were not breathing, they were dead. They were out of their body looking down into the operating room or whatever. They were, or they were in oblivion, right? Some of the people who've died and come back say there's nothing there. There was nothing. I have no memory. No mnemosiny, right? There's no mnemosiny over there. Yeah, this is the forbidden topic. So imagine that in the ancient world, death and resurrection were fairly common, and healing was associated with the capacity to resurrect dead people, as was messianism, as was wisdom. And this is part of what Aman is implying, if not directly stating, even though his the pictures he paints are erotically profligate, right? They're very much about like sex orgies and intoxications and drug use and psychedelics mixed with snake venom and the purple in your eyes made out of the substances that are unspeakable. Right? But he's like a raging prophet when he starts talking this way. And in a sense, he's saving us from the necessity of having to engage directly in such debauchery by somehow representing it in his tone and his orations and his cadences. Right? It's very profound. Later perhaps I may think other things. But for the moment, I'm quite grateful to his bizarre and wild spirit. Yeah, the way he shapes the mind. His music. It's helped me see things I've never before understood. And just to circle back to them, we adore possession. This is why we watch films. We want to be possessed. But there's nothing good to possess us. And so the religions are in a way saying like, this is the best thing to be possessed by. This is the only thing to be possessed by. Be possessed by the Spirit of truth. Be possessed by the divine justice. Be possessed by the prophet. Be possessed by the one who the prophet serves. Right? And only this one. And no other possessions. Hilariously, Jesus says, effectively, give up all your possessions. By which we think he means our belongings. And, no man with a camel will pass through the eye of the needle. The eye of the needle is a space that lets you into the city after dark, where it's a tunnel that's only wide enough to pass through with your unencumbered body, so that you cannot bring goods that can be exchanged for money without paying tariffs into the city or out of the city at night. It's a metaphor, and it's probably a metaphor in 9 ways other than that one as well. But there's another sense of it, which is be not possessed by anything other than the Spirit of truth. Yeah. Yes. There's so much more here to cover, but I've managed to circle most of the crucial elements for today. I'm so grateful to have traveled these paths in my own awareness, thought, and concern. I feel as if I've risen above the stations of my ordinary waking consciousness and my personal identity somewhat successfully today. That's a precious gift for which I'm humbly grateful. Thank you for joining me. I wish you beautiful ways and paths and dreams and relations, adventures and fulfillments. I look forward to learning again, together, for each other, very soon. Bye-bye for now.